Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Chalik. I'm proud to be the board chair of RDAR, and I'm chairing today's session. I would like to identify that the meeting is being recorded, and in fact, the segment with Ted Billier, which will come on later, will be edited out, and we will make it available later on our website. So that's encouraging. So welcome to our annual meeting, and we'll call this meeting to order. This is the first annual general meeting of RDAR. And so this is RDAR, where big ideas grow. And as your chair, I think most of you are familiar with me. I'm a proud Albertan. I've been chair since the inception of this organization in April of 2020. I've involved in many boards and in the livestock side of agriculture primarily, but this particular endeavor in RDAR in itself has been a great initiative in bringing both the crop and livestock together. I do sit on the advisory board of Canadian Food Inspection Agency, as well as Calgary Economic Development and some other entities. I am a veterinarian and keenly interested in science and research, and we're based on that. And I consider myself to be a producer as well, and this is producer-led, and it's great to have the members here. I think we have 31 or 32 of our members in tow today, so that bodes well for a great meeting. I would like to just state that Lydia Taplash, RDAR's operations director, is serving as our scrutineer today, and she can turn her mic on and off. Our bylaws require a quorum of 25% of membership, so probably don't need to ask, but Lydia, do we have quorum?
We do, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Right now, we have 25 of our members of our authorized representatives have signed on. I will keep my eyes on it. There is one phone call listener, and if that individual can just mention who they are in case they are one of our authorized reps. So I'm wondering if technical support can unmute the person on the phone so they can identify themselves, please.
Hi. Oh, I'm unmuted. It's Melissa Zembick from Old College.
Great. Thank you very much, Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, thank you, Lydia, and break in as you need to. Just a brief overview of our agenda. Of course, we've got the business of the organization appointing auditors, some tweaking of some bylaws, of course, and then our CEO, Mark Redmond, will give his executive report, and we will unveil our strategic framework, which has been undertaken by the board and management. A great deal of work has gone on to that. And then hopefully a hard stop at 2:30, and at which time Ted Billier, the Wayne Gretzky of ag industry foresighting, will join us. But on behalf of our current board, senior management and staff, as well as members of the founding board who happen to be on, I would like to welcome you. Things have really been swiftly moving along since April 2020. It seems like yesterday. We're up and moving. You'll hear more about it. It's been exciting times. And with that, the agenda is in front of you. Before we get the meeting fully underway, we'll get a welcome message from Minister Horner.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you virtually today. On behalf of Premier Jason Kenney and my colleagues at the Alberta Legislature, it's my pleasure to bring greetings to the Results-Driven Agriculture Research Annual General Meeting. This has been a difficult time. However, despite significant challenges we've all experienced, Alberta's agriculture and agri-food sector has been a bright spot in the province's economy. Our agri-food sector contributes over $9 billion in economic output, continuing to drive the engine. This sector is becoming more powerful and drives economic growth in Alberta. RDAR is a critical partner in ensuring our agriculture industry gets the most from its investments, and Albertans get the most for their hard-earned dollars. In 2019, the Alberta government committed to making sure farmers and ranchers would guide research priorities, and you've done that by including producers and industry partners in the work that you do. Our goal is for agricultural research in Alberta to lead to tangible benefits for farmers and at the same time reflect the industry's needs and priorities. RDAR has hit the ground running with over $30 million in new investments and more than $50 million in total managed investments. As a result of this funding, 139 new results-driven research projects have been approved. To name a few, these projects include growing our greenhouse sector, Applied Research Association's program and project funding, water use and irrigation efficiency, livestock genetics, crop disease resistance, wetlands and waterway stewardship. That's just a small sample of the impressive work you've done. On top of the many challenges the pandemic threw our way, last season, extreme temperatures forced producers across the province to face another set of challenges. While overall crop quality was above the 5-year average, drought-like conditions significantly affected yields across the province. RDAR recognized the need to provide immediate help and jumped in with a fast call for research proposals in September. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that call and many more projects in the coming months and years. Thanks again for the opportunity to address you all. Hopefully next time is in person, and please enjoy the rest of your AGM.
Thank you, Minister Horner, and you'll see he had a bronze of a heavy horse in the background. I brought you a bull today, if you can see over my right shoulder. I would like to just let folks know that present at today's meeting, besides the members, and to refresh others, our membership or shareholders shareholders not in that sense, but they have the voting rights. We have 19 marketing boards and commissions, 12 industry associations, and 2 applied research associations. But given there's 157 people or more on present at today's meeting, we have a number of guests and members of the media. So I will just ask, is there any objection to the presence of any of these persons? If there are none, then welcome everyone. In front of you, we have a slate of the directors. In the interest of time, I won't go through them all. They are your representatives and are the governance of this organization. Of course, also on the call, we have some of the folks that counsel us, our legal counsel, Adrian Waller from Calgary, governance, George from Edmonton, and George Cuff is worked with many of your organizations. And I believe, and I know that John Knapp, who many of us know, are on as well. I think 2 of our directors are not present. Steve Kenyon is down in the States, and John Conrad, who is a representative of the Department of Agriculture and Forestry. He will be joining us a bit later. So thank you to all past and present directors for the great and diligent work that you do. Now a bit of housekeeping. So this is the technical support piece. There are opportunities to ask questions. Of course, there will be voting for the membership, and to submit a question, you can use the Q&A tab. And to verbally ask a question, raise your hand and wait for the moderator to allow you to unmute and introduce yourself. Voting, as I said, is restricted to the Class A members. We just need a simple majority of votes balloted. Our scrutineer will identify the results of the votes, and you will have to use Slido as Class A members to register your vote. And I would encourage you, don't everybody sit on your hands. We do need, when a motion is on the floor, we do need a mover and a seconder. At this point in time, we always address conflict of interest with such a large group. I don't think there's no monetary transactions being undertaken here, et cetera, but conflict of interest is very important to us, and it's a protocol at all of our meetings. So I'll call for the declaration of conflict of interest if there are any. Okay, on to item number 2, the approval of the agenda. I would like to call for the approval of the agenda. And I ask for a motion. Thank you, John Mako. John Mako moves. Do we have a seconder?
Lauren Coleman.
Thank you, Lauren. Any discussion? There being none, can we have a vote for all those in favor? Class A members, please vote now.
Mr. Chair, just so you know, we currently have 26 voters on the line, and we're looking for simple majority, so I'll be looking for up to 12 votes.
Okay, and if anybody is having trouble registering their votes, get a hold of Lydia, I guess. How are we doing?
We currently have 13 votes in favor.
Okay, we will declare the motion passed. Thank you.
Close the
Motion.
poll. Thank you.
Pardon me?
No, we've, the poll can be closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion number 2 is to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the March 9th members meeting. That was a members meeting. It was not the first AGM meeting, just for clarity. I do have those minutes in front of me if anyone has any questions, but could we have a mover to dispense with the reading of the minutes? And this is again, thank you, Brad. That's moved. Do we have a seconder?
Darwin would second that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion? All in favor?
And the vote is open in Slido. Before we get going, we do have a couple of members that do need to get logged into Slido. So please check your emails, the authorized representatives. And okay, it looks like we're up and running. We have 18 in favor, Mr. Chair.
Well done, members. This technology is not always easy, but I think we're getting better at it. And I should have said I'd much rather have had this in person. However, I guess today the weather in some parts of the province isn't really helpful. We have now motion number 3, and that is to approve the minutes of the March 9th 2021 member meeting. Could we have a mover, please? Don't be shy. Thank you, Carrie, and seconded by Connie Phillips. Any discussion? There being none, could we now vote to approve the minutes of the March 9th meeting?
And we currently have, Mr. Chair, 19 votes in favor, none opposed or abstentions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, we have the Auditor's Report and the financial statements for the period ending March 31st. John Coke, would you like to speak to this? If not.
Yes, thank you, David. So we, as the members are probably aware, we have an Audit and Finance Committee. That committee works closely with staff and also had an independent opportunity to work with. Oh, sorry, I guess I'm supposed to put some video on. Is this okay now? Lydia, you happy?
I'm very happy, John. We can see you. Thank you.
Okay, good.
I'm not, just a sec, John. I'm not so sure I'm that happy. Didn't you shave this morning or what's going on?
This
Sorry.
is my cold. It's cold this morning, Mr. Challa.
All right. And I should have introduced John as our Chair of Audit and Finance. Excuse me, John. Thank you.
Okay, so back to on video. The Audit and Finance Committee meets on a regular basis, is in close contact with our CFO. Also had an opportunity to work with and have an independent and private meeting with our auditors to ask them questions as well. And the Audit and Finance Committee had brought forward the audited statement to the board with a recommendation to approve. Thank you, David.
Okay. Next slide. So I'd like for a motion to accept the auditor's report. We'll get to questions after the motion is on the table, please. Could we have a motion, a mover to accept the auditor's report? Thank you, Brad. Seconder? Connie Phillips, thank you. Now, discussion. There was a question in the chat box, and forgive me, I may not see all the questions. Could that question come up again, please?
Yes, I'll read it out for you, Mr. Chair. Can members get a breakdown of what are included in staffing costs, professional costs, and expenditures, which led to a GST cost of $18,867?
Okay, for a specific question like that, I may ask David Cochran, who is our Chief Financial Officer. David, I know this is to have all of the numbers specifically for this particular query. You might need your calculator, or if you can give a general answer to this person, because I can't see who it is at any rate, but welcome, David Cochran, CFO.
Thank you. Yes. So the $18,000 is receivable. It was carried over from a grant that Alberta Barley had, and we had to repay them. So our initial $1.4 million grant had ineligible expenses, which it included GST for whatever reason that was ineligible. And so we had to wait for our new grant, which came in this fiscal year in April, to repay that money the GST. So normally you wouldn't have seen that. The GST would have just been paid as we went along. It would have been expensed. But in this particular case, the way through the transition from our setup, it was left as a payable because basically we had to borrow that money.
Okay, and I think there was a small question on the breakdown of staff versus professional services or something that you can
Sure.
generally.
Staff were about $600,000 staffing costs.
Okay.
And professional cost question was also asked, please, David.
Sure, yes. And professional costs were about 247, about $275,000.
Yeah, and just I'll chime in on the professional side. In the setup of this organization and all of the contracting, et cetera, there was a significant need for outside consultant work to get the organization set up, legal, the various components of getting registered, et cetera. So thank you, David. Any other questions?
I see. There is a follow-up question. This was included. I think we wanted to know why the separation of the two costs. And just to clarify, the two costs of staffing and professional. Yes, okay. So that is the question. Why the separation of the two costs, staffing and professional?
Well, for me as chair, it's great to be able to have those divided out just so that I know orders of magnitude and to be able to track them from year to year. But perhaps David wants to answer, or John.
That's exactly right, Dr. Chalik. It's simply internal purposes, internal reporting. It just happened to be captured in the audited financial statements, broken out like that. And that's just a preference of the organization.
Thank you. Carrie, I hope that answers your questions. Anyone else, please? There being none, I would ask for the vote. Can we advance the slide, please? There we go. Okay, we did have it. Sorry. And scrutineer, how are we doing?
We have 20 votes in favor, none opposed or abstained.
Wonderful. And we do welcome questions here. So, Carrie, thank you very much. I wasn't being short or abrupt with you, but we have to keep moving it on. Because transparency and how money is handled is extremely important to us. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, appointment of the auditor. Excuse me. Could we have a motion to appoint BDO as auditor for the period April 1st to March 31st, 2021?
John Mako and Brad Dubois.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
John Colk here, Chair of Finance. So we had reviewed, obviously, the auditor went out for bidding. So that was reviewed, all the different firms that bid on it. As a finance and audit committee, we reviewed the work that was done on the last financial on the financial statement you just approved, and we brought forward also to the board our recommendation that we extend this auditor for an ongoing year, partly to in terms of costs, but also in terms of their knowledge of the business that we're doing.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any questions? There being none, I'll ask for the vote, please. This is a vote to appoint BDO as auditor.
Votes are coming in quickly. Thank you. We are at 20 votes, all in favor. And 22 now.
Very much.
So it keeps rising.
Okay. Thank you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our CEO. Many of you will know when the organization was set up that Dr. Gerald Hauer was our former CEO, and we were very pleased to get the services of Dr. Mark Redmond, who has now been our CEO for almost a year, and I believe is very much enjoying his job. And so, Mark, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be at this afternoon's meeting. And as we said, it'd be better if we could meet you all in person, but we're looking forward to that next year. I'm happy to bring the members, directors, and partners this report after the first full year of operations of RDAR. It's been an exciting time, and we've made remarkable progress over the last year delivering our product of results-driven agriculture research. Our approach to engaging with producers in research has been a process called T4P. You'll see in a lot of documents, and as we go into the strategic plan review later today, we refer to T4P. This is the engagement of producers, the private and public sector in partnership to work together in delivering research results. And as we've initiated our research calls this year, we've been looking for the T4P approach, viewing that as the most reliable way of getting research from the laboratory and the test plots into the producers' fields. So this year, we've had 4 funding calls. They started just over a year ago. As the minister has already addressed the point, we've invested over $31 million. I'm happy to say that with some additional investments that we have agreed to last week, we stand at $41 million investments in 139 projects. That means we have committed 92% of the funding that we have available to us to power outcomes, research-driven outcomes. The leverage that we have secured, again, another factor that we look for, we very rarely invest in research alone. We've been able to leverage our investments by 2.4 times. So a quick calculation will show you that the 41 million we have invested to date will mean an approximately $100 million of research being invested. We have had a lot of demand for funding support. Over 500 letters of intent were reviewed over the last year or since our inception. Over 400 grants are now being managed in a database that we have built called the Agriculture Research Grant Organizer, or ARGO. And that is going to be a great resource which serves us well into the future in terms of managing this very large number of grants already, 400, and being timely in terms of reporting, identifying opportunities and duplication. I will add one further sidebar here. 400 grants is not an inconsiderable number. In my experience working in research over the years, it is only the national funding agencies that I see managing such a large number of projects. So it's a great opportunity for RDAR. And when you look at the 13 employees that RDAR has currently, that workload and leverage is considerable. And so it's only through technology and dedication that we're able to drive our processes forward. You see also 6% of our revenue currently is spent on administration costs, which again is far lower than very many other enterprises. We do receive questions in terms of how does our research process work, and it is a rigorous process. We start with the objectives and the areas identified by our producer advisory committee, and they form the foundation of looking for where we should be making our investments. Our dedicated group of the research team, 6 individuals at this time, led by Clint Dobson. His team of RPOs work hand in hand with applicants right from the origin of the call, right through to making their applications, improving their applications so that they maximize input. And we look for a return at the farm gate. We look at the grants, including knowledge to action plans, because we are concentrating on delivering benefits to the farm gate. We employ, beyond our on receiving our grant applications as an internal review, projects which are selected to move forwards from a letter of intent or an expression of interest, move forward to a rigorous process of external expert review. And you'll see on this slide, I've keyed out, we have a panel of 116 national and international experts, which include academics, national agencies, for example, the USDA, Agriculture Canada, private companies in terms of the major agricultural companies, as well as producers who do extensive reviews and make recommendations to AUDAR's funding committees, the 3 of them, 3 levels associated with different amounts of funding to move forwards with application. You'll see at the bottom of the slide, we have reviewed 582 proposals with $164 million requested. That has resulted in the 139 approvals and $43 million of investment. So if you want to see where the investments have gone by program, you'll see the most subscribed program is the Accelerating Agriculture Innovation Program. And the next most significant program is a targeted call. So we identified needs in discussions with producers and industry, and has deemed soil health and water preservation are key. And we have secured $7.3 million in project investments there. You'll note that those 2 categories exceed the investment made in the Agriculture Funding Consortium from 2020. So we are independently funding a significant portion of research in this province. You'll also see here our funding to the ARAs, investment decision made by the RDAR board to support the agricultural research associations across the province in moving ahead with their work. The $10 million, that was just identified and agreed to last week, and that will be the 2021-2022 Agricultural Funding Consortium. AUDAR led the selection of projects and the administration of projects, and our Argo database is going to be used by the entire funding consortium. Those are agricultural research investors from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. They will be using Argo to help manage their processes. So I indicated that we invest in the areas identified by the Producer Advisory Committee. The 4 areas of investment identified were competitiveness, productivity and profitability, sustainable production, marketing, and knowledge mobilization. As I indicated, all of our applications have a component of knowledge mobilization in their investment portfolio. So the 6.1 million in direct investment actually represents an under-reading of the investment we make in knowledge mobilization. You'll also see on the right-hand slide, part of the slide, the investment by sector, and the fact that we are balanced well between crops and livestock. I'll illustrate our investments with just 3 examples, and the minister actually stole my thunder in a number of places, but genetics and genomics will play a significant research opportunity for Alberta in the future to develop livestock breeds which have market advantages and crops which are suited better to our climate. The example I'm showing you comes from the Canadian Beef Improvement Network, CBIN. We invested $640,000 in an initiative led by the Canadian Beef Breeds Council, together with 8 other breed associations, something of a rarity for all these breed associations to come together to work in harmony at developing a suite of tools and a database to help producers themselves make better livestock selection. With this, you'll see an improvement in genetic literacy as one of the spinouts. The bottom box, in terms of network centers of excellence, it's been recognized that one thing that RDAR brings to the Alberta research landscape is our network and our ability to connect. And so we make projects even better by linkages with groups such as Livestock Gentech, Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, and Genome Alberta. We also stretch our initiatives across the country and across nations to make sure that we are not duplicating work and we're delivering advantages as quickly as possible to Alberta producers. Next example you see is one in the area of climate variability and adaptability. And we are focused on the environmental challenges that producers face. As the minister indicated, we had our rapid call in the area of drought remission. This particular project illustrated comes from 4 ARAs working together, led by Northeast Applied Research Association. And their work, approved in the last month, is to use innovative cropping systems to improve water holding and drainage. The challenge we face in the province, while some parts of the province need to enhance water holding, typically in the Peace Country, they need drainage capacity. And so this particular project spans a large part of the province to deliver results that will be applicable. You'll see in this bottom quadrant, we have a portfolio of products in this area, engaging with other ARAs, for example, the Chinook ARA in the south, as well as a number of other projects coming through our agricultural funding consortium. The final project I'll illustrate, again, keyed out by the minister, is important in terms of meeting the public's needs in terms of accessibility to affordable, safe food. And Alberta has an opportunity to develop proprietary technology and knowledge to drive a strong industry which would reduce our dependence on imports of particularly fresh fruit and vegetables, which, given the concern this week over truckers being able to haul food into Alberta, will be important. And so we're using resources originally developed by the Alberta government in terms of beautiful greenhouses for scale-up work at Brooks, as well as facilities within Lethbridge College itself to drive this important new project with broad benefits to the growth of our sector. If you are looking for more about RDAR research, then don't look any further than the website. You'll find at the web address keyed on this slide, the full inventory of projects that we have currently funded. And you'll see when our RPOs have had the opportunity, they have filled extensive detail in about the particular projects in terms of information which we're allowed to distribute into the public domain. If you don't want to go to the website, then the next opportunity is to ask us, and you'll see that in 2021, we met our commitment to be broadly accessible to Alberta producers and stakeholders, and we met out in the field in a very broad series of events which stretch from Fort Vermilion in the Peace Country to the north, to the foothills and the lands of Farming Smarters territory in the south, to discuss initiatives, to look at test plots, to look at the work that's being conducted as part of our experimental plans. We anticipate doing more of this in 2022, and it'll be even better without COVID. Quick financial snapshot. Currently where we stand, we've received $44.9 million. We have contracted $41.5 million. We have a further $10 million funding consortium commitments made for a total commitment of $51.5 million. I will key out the CAP contribution here. This is a contribution under the current CAP agreement, which is actually coming to an end in March 2022. And we look forward to hearing more about CAP 2.0 later this year. Quickly, I'd like to acknowledge the board and standing standing committee activities, and acknowledge the work of the administrative team in pulling together the work of the directors in their decision making and administration. And this is primarily work of Lydia Talpash and Heather Crosby. Kudos to them for the support of the work you see here. This particular slide, extremely detailed. You see it is available to Class A members in your deck for further analysis. Our 12-month outlook, you'll be hearing extensively from our communications team. Junada does a great job on Twitter and LinkedIn, so that can be an instant source of information in terms of where we are. And you'll hear in the next month the call for the Agricultural Funding Consortium. You'll be hearing more about some specific targeted calls that we're working on. The lead there being in some genetic advancement of agriculture in the province. We'll be out and about meeting with researchers and actually filming the work that they're doing for TEDx type talks. And the first TED Talk, will be this afternoon with Ted Billier. And we are working towards a one-day conference in June, post-calving, post-seeding, when we can bring this whole group together to meet. Our next AGM in 2023 will be scheduled in January. However, before then, we'll be looking for the nomination of 2 new member-nominated directors. And that process will begin after harvest, most likely in the middle of October. That, Mr. Chair, is my report. I'm happy to take questions. I will also add that we do have the chairs of all of our standing committees who are also available to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. We do have 3 questions. The first one is on slide 32, the research investment by funding call. The ask is to clarify that ARA, AMI, and Genome Alberta investments are grouped together, and just looking for some reasoning on that, please.
So those are groups administering work and projects for us. So we have contracted AMI, $50,000 to assist us in identifying work for advanced machine learning. And so we'll be selecting 10 projects for AMI to work to adding enhancements with machine learning. And Genome Alberta is helping us in a similar way to identify genomics projects. The reason why the initiatives are grouped together was to avoid just putting a general tag in there. I actually asked for specifics, and so that's only for a matter of convenience to bring together a group of partners.
Thank you, Mark. Next question, I'm going to combine 2 of them. Just clarifying whether RDAR has supported any of the research into seaweed production to reduce methane produced by cattle. And there's also a thought that Seaweed Research was tier funding.
Clint can help me if I answer this wrong. It's an area of opportunity that we have discussed, but at this time, we are not directly funding work in that area. And tier funding, somebody's going to have to help me. What are we referencing there?
So that comment came from Alex. Alex, if you'd like to unmute and perhaps clarify?
Sorry, I'm a reporter. I just thought I'd short circuit the process there. It's tier funding is the carbon tax from large emitters.
Yeah. So at this time we aren't accessing any tier funding, but Alex, as I mentioned, it is work that both the board chair and I have been following. Most recently, I was actually working within PEI, so I'm well aware of the potential of that work. Part of the advantage of working with back in Alberta, with the extensive knowledge we have, there is the opportunity to develop synthetic forms of those compounds, which actually can be manufactured here in the province. And so this is an area that we are going to be exploring with our partners at Alberta Innovates, who certainly have expertise in this particular area, as well as Genome Alberta.
Great. Oh, and thank you, Carrie, for explaining the acronym. Couple of questions, Mark, around government funding, and I'm going to combine them. So one is, do we have any information about what CAP 2.0 is going to look like? And quick follow-up is, are there more funds coming from the government of Alberta annually for RDAR to invest?
So CAP 2.0, in November, the expectation that CAP 2.0 would be forthcoming at a Guelph announcement in July 2022 was announced. At this time, we have no details in terms of the amount of money that will be in CAP or the current distribution of funds within the CAP envelope. Just for general information to the membership, CAP is a series of different funds. For example, there's a value-added fund. There is a further investment fund for major funding initiatives, as well as the research fund that Auditor is administering at this time. We will be in discussions with the AFRID ministry later this year to make our case for funding.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So a very popular question with 4 upvotes here. When investing directly with or to the benefit of private industry, is there a threshold of cash or in-kind contribution that is required from that group in order for RDAR to provide funding?
Under the CAP agreement, we do look for a one-to-one match. For a number of these projects, we have looked at the greenhouse project. We were able to leverage greater than 1-to-1, which is why we were able to make that 2.3 times leverage number that I indicated earlier. And so that 1-to-1 is the funding match that we look for, as well as I indicated, we look for the T4P, transdisciplinary producer-private partnership. We want to see producers engaged in the work, and we like to see our academic partners engaged in the work. And so we get into that whole scrutiny of process and validation of work. There has to be the rationale behind science driving the industry forwards.
Okay, thank you. And one last comment. Going to paraphrase and summarize a little bit. Wanted to recognize that, and thanks for all the work that RDAR is doing, and support and appreciated support for the ARAs, although not all our ARAs self-identify as ARAs. And asking for recognition that program funding has not increased in 17 years. And though project funding is great, it's the programs that will help information lives on beyond the life. So the question is, will RDAR commit to developing key programs, especially with the loss of core capacity at Alberta Agriculture?
This time we don't have funding available for programs other than the 7 programs which were transferred to the post-secondary institutions for support. We are willing, and we are currently engaged working with a number of the academic programs who also will require some additional assistance building up their work over the next 12 to 24 months. We are working closely with the ARAs. We're supporting an initiative led by Cara to build a strong business case for the support of the 12 ARAs and the work that they're doing. And so that work is ongoing. The ARAs have come together and put a 23-point action plan together. AUDAR is funding a consultant, Mr. John Knapp, to work with the ARAs in building that business case. And the first deliverable, which AUDAR is funding, is a $75,000 economic benefit analysis study being conducted for the group. And that will become available later in the spring. We are open to funding projects, and as I keyed out, the climate solutions work being done with our friends up in North Peace. We are able to make long-term project commitments. The climate solution work that I indicated is a 4-year project, and that is a long-term commitment, which to many you could say would be akin to a program of work. RDAR does look to delivering outcomes, and there have to be specific measurables. Many of you will become familiar with language being used by RDAR in terms of we are output driven. We need to see results at the farm gate. We're outcome driven, looking for results at the farm gate. We're not output driven. It's not how many papers have been put out. It's not conventional signs of research activity that we are looking to measure. And as we come to the strategic plan review later this afternoon, you will see the expectation of the province is that we have hard outcomes and hard deliverables. And so we need hard outcomes rather than soft outcomes. We're willing to work with any and all partners at developing projects which deliver outcomes to the producers at their gate.
Hey, Mark, I see we've got 2 questions, which I will combine into one because they're related, and there's a hand up. So I'll ask the question first, and then Kim McConnell will get to you right away. So question, what's been the progress on the Extension Task Force, and will there be continued long-term funding for Extension projects?
That will depend on the outcomes of the Extension Task Force. AUDAR's role is a network and a catalyst in these bigger envelopes or umbrellas of extension. So the task force is led by Nicole Neubauer. We're privileged to have her agree to step in, along with 6 other members of the producer community, including the ARAs. And they are slated to produce a report for industry, the agriculture sector, to review in June this year.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. And Kim, if you'd like to unmute, please chime in, and then I think there are no further questions, so I'll pass it back to the chair. I
think Kim hit the wrong button. He's a keener, so. Okay.
I'm happy to step aside for the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I'm glad that you mentioned Nicole. Yes, she's on here. Nicole is chairing that task force. That task force is diligently working on the knowledge transfer, training, the extension piece. And so we have to wait for some of those points. I would like to also mention several of the people who the projects were identified, like Ray Price and Sandy Russell. Others are on the line. And I would also note that Tim Schultz, who's Chief of Staff for Minister Horner, I think is one of the attendees. And of course, we work closely with the department, with the Minister and the Deputy Minister, Shannon, as well as some of the ADMs. So it's good to have participation from the Department of Ag and Forestry here. We're going to move now to our bylaw amendments. Those have been circulated. We have our legal counsel here, Adrian, excuse me. I promised myself I wouldn't do that. Adrian Waller is here. So what we would like to do is the government's committee has reviewed the bylaws and is proposing these amendments. We're going to start with Article 50. And the rationale here is that we needed to clarify the nature of the meeting that was held on March 9th, 2021. I already referenced that. It was not the first AGM of members to be held under the Act. And so the prescribed deadline for holding the first annual member meeting is 18 months following the incorporation date. RDAR was incorporated July 22nd, 2020. Therefore, the deadline for the first AGM, and we're meeting that deadline by meeting on the 18th, was actually January 21st, 2022. So RDAR's first annual members meeting or AGM is being held today, obviously. So as a result of that decision, that then cascades down into Articles 51, which then the board approved the bylaws. The members in March 2021, the plan was to hold RDAR's first annual meeting in the fall of 2022, within 6 months of the end of the RDAR preceding financial year, as required by Section 161B of the Act, during which directors would have been elected. On review, it was determined that a fall members meeting would be impractical and that the best time for RDAR's annual members meeting would be in January of each year. So it was always the intent that the directors elected in March 21 would hold office for approximately 1.5 years before the next election was held. So this change in years in Articles 51, you can see them bolded and underlined here, carries out the original intent, except that these first directors will hold office until January 2023. Could we move to new Article 57? This provides clarity on what a year means, so that defining that they run from one annual meeting to another. This also provides clarity that the first year in office for directors elected in March 2021 will officially start January 18th, 2022. So I'm going to call for a vote with the motion to approve the amendments of the RDAR bylaws in Articles 50, 51, 52, and 57 as approved by the Board of Directors, as set out in the second column of the table attached to the notice to shareholders as Appendix A. Could we have a mover, please? Thank you, Michael.
And Mr. Chair, if I can confirm, is this Michael Strebchuk? Just want to confirm. Yes, perfect. Thank you. And then Carrie seconds.
Thank you.
And just as an update, we are now at 28 voters.
Thank you. Open it up for questions or discussion, please. There being none, can we ask for the vote, please? How are we doing, Lydia?
The votes are in. We have 20 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. So thank you to the members. This covers most of the official business. Just of note, and I want to, well, I guess, sorry, here we go. I got ahead of myself. We now have a special resolution is also being proposed that is in support of the bylaw amendments, and that we ask our members to allow us to hold our AGMs in January so that there is no conflict with other producer groups events, and updated interim financials will be reported at that time. So the resolution AGM date to January each year. John Mako moves. And Brad Dubois second. Thank you very much. Any discussion? Could we have the vote, please, Class A members?
They are coming in quickly. We are at 19 in favor. So that gives it a majority.
Wonderful. Is there any other business that would like to be discussed before we terminate the meeting? I do have one small thing to point out. Our good friend David Bailey, CEO of Genome Alberta, a good partner of RDAR, is also a perch breeder. And he noted that the statue behind Minister Horner is likely that statue of a famous stallion, perch stallion, Halifax. So we've all learned something today. Thank you, David Bailey. Are there any other points that would like to be brought up before we terminate and break for 5 minutes and then launch our strategic framework? If not, could I have a motion to terminate the meeting, please?
Michael Strepcha.
Okay.
And
All in
Brad
favor? Vote now.
Only 5 people so far want to terminate.
Maybe they're enjoying the moderator and presenters or not.
We are at 17, so that gives us a majority.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Mike?
Mr. Chair, if I could interject, if the members' pleasure, I wonder if we could forego this 5-minute break. I would really like to start Ted Billet's discussions on time, and we are 7 minutes overtime. Well, actually, we're 12 minutes overtime at present.
Well, we're going to take a break either before or after you. So people will have to, they can stay on longer for Ted. Ted isn't going to any party. He's under 3 feet of snow in Toronto. So it's your pleasure if you want to hold folks through your presentation, or do you want them to concentrate after they take a 5-minute bio break? What do you choose?
I'd sooner move through, and then we can make sure that that you and Ted have the fires well stoked and the brandy in hand.
All right. So I am happy to bring Dr. Redmond back. There's been an incredible amount of work done by this board, and of course, all the foundational work done in the consultation through our members and our advisory committee. That the advisory committee numbers 50, as you know, and staff. So back to you, Mark, with the unveiling of the strategic framework.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm delighted to bring forward the strategic framework for an introduction to you. We won't be going through the framework in detail. However, we'll give you a taste of some of the direction that we're putting together. The work that we have undertaken since August last year has made one point clear, and that's our purpose. Our purpose is to power the research that transforms agriculture. And that is the banner headline in the strategic framework, which is made available for download earlier today. The document is a fast read. It's only about 15 minutes to read. However, the contents are a lot more significant, and there's great direction to be mined from the work. I will apologize for the delay. Lydia and I will attest to the fact that after meeting with the board on Friday, when the board approved the framework, we did have some cleanup and page layouts to organize, and so the launch today was more necessitated out of process rather than any other form of delay. And we certainly wanted a quality product put in your hands, and that's what I believe we've done. The objective in terms of developing the framework was to listen to the producers. We wanted everyone to be able to say we've been heard. And so the process that we have followed created multiple opportunities for dialogue. We cast our nets wide looking at opportunities for Alberta agriculture in the future. And as a part of that net casting, which actually brought Ted Billier into our sphere of influence, and you'll be hearing a great deal in terms of the industry scans that we're participating in from him. Our third objective was to be unapologetically bold, to be aspirational. And this was a challenge, and Dr. Chelik and I often have something of a yin and yang relationship. I wanted to be highly aspirational, and Dr. Chelik kept asking, when are you going to show me the results? I think what you have before you is a great balance now of the plans to move forwards. And finally, you heard me in the first presentation I made, have an eye to the farm gate. Everything we do, we take a lens looking back at a benefit at the farm gate. And so the process you've been engaged in, we're now at the end of the second phase. We've had the approval of the board. We're introducing the plan to you today. And we're very rapidly going to be moving into the development of action plans. Traditionally, businesses will say they have business plans. We'll be examining the resources that we have internally to work with, but also externally in terms of researchers, the T4Ps that we look for, and looking at improving our systems and processes. This will be an iterative work, and that's why we call this strategic plan that others may have developed. We call this a framework. It's a framework because it contains the principles that we are governed by, and it allows us to be agile and nimble and respond to opportunities. For example, the drought call that you saw today, some of the climate change work, which has been introduced with our partners during the year. The framework will allow us to be nimble and responsive. I will pay homage to the founding board, the inaugural board of RDAR. They put in place the vision, the mandate, and the values that we live by today. You can see actually we've grown the value list by one, and that is courage. We need to be courageous in the decisions that we make and to step outside our comfort zone. And so the plans that you see stemming from this framework will encompass all of these initiatives with that long-term goal of agriculture in Alberta reaching its full potential. A magical moment that we had during the board staff retreat in November was gaining a greater understanding of who RDAR is. And to that point in November, and probably to this point today when we introduce this model broadly, I think there's not a clear understanding of the role of RDAR. We are not simply a funder of, somebody's playing with my slides, Lydia. We're not simply a funder of research. We are a trustee of the funds given to us by the Alberta government to invest in research. We're a trustee of those areas identified as lead priorities and needs by producers. But primarily, we are answerable to Albertans, the taxpayers who put the money into the system to begin with. They are the investors. The beneficiaries are clear in terms of it's the on-farm producers. And we see that extending to the food value chain and ultimately the consumers. In the middle, it is our role to assess research projects. We have the authority to grant funds to the T4P researchers to perform the work that will deliver the benefits. Ultimately, the researchers, through RDAR, is accountable to Albertans. To make everything run smoothly and clear, we have to be clear in our communication. So we're driven by accountability and outcomes, the benefits of the agriculture sector, and ultimately the consumer. So as we look at where we see RDAR being in 5 years' time, this is a new model, and we will be building trust in that model to deliver 3 main objectives. The first is to increase farm cash receipts, or net revenues, as one of our board members says. Dr. Chalik would say profits, but that is the driver. We want to increase exports. That will be the way we grow our market. It aligns clearly with one of those objectives identified by the producers, and to add value and investments to the province and jobs. The primary role, and one that is a terrific challenge, is we want to see research adopted. It's not good enough to develop a practice. It has to be used broadly. And the benefits have to be focused on increasing competitiveness, profitability, productivity. We all know today we're being asked to do more with less. By the research we're doing and the adoption of that research, we will power new technologies. And finally, we're going to be working broadly. We don't want people working in isolation. That is not one of our, collaboration is one of our values. And so we'll be working collectively to create innovations to benefit people, animals, and the environment. We have 4 areas of strategic priority. Each has clear deliverables. We have put systems already in place in our first year, and we'll be building out on these as deliverables. And in this next slide, I'll show you the initiatives that we're going to be targeting in our first year. We'll be building details on this as we close this meeting today. We'll be looking at profitability and competitiveness with targeted investment in new crops, in livestock practices, in driving the production of agricultural materials. We'll be looking to secure food sources, build capacity not only in production, but capacity in processing. That is the way we're going to increase the overall revenue effect that agriculture has in Alberta. For sustainability, we'll be looking to drive the adoption of best management practices. In fact, I would say the development of best management practices and adoption of best management practices. We'll be looking to work in strong partnerships right from the beginning. We'll be looking to grow investment envelopes by working very closely with industry, and we'll be looking to manage our research portfolio to make sure that we are not overcommitted in any one particular area, and we're making sure that we are addressing all opportunities and we don't have gaps. And finally, we have our commitment to stakeholder engagement in person, working together collaboratively and putting together better research proposals, looking at driving successful research forwards. The measured outcomes that I alluded to earlier, these are the tests that RDAR is going to be held to. And so we have worked through some 30 potential outcomes to come down to this list. And in discussions with the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Rural Economic Development, they have challenged us in terms of, have you modeled these test systems and are you able to deliver results? They want to make sure that we are able to deliver on commitments that we make. We've got a number of areas marked by that dagger footnote symbol that we'll be looking to develop. Others are already well developed in terms of, we'll be working with the Gallup organization as a potential survey, quality survey performer to assess Class A member satisfaction. Our portfolio, you can see that we are driving hard on putting all of the money into investments. We have very little uncommitted funds left with the, you'll see by the springtime when we announce a number of other funding calls, we will be fully vested and we'll be leveraging those investments broadly with the private sector. We'll be having more projects engaged with the private sector, and we'll be counting new practices, technologies, and crop varieties seeded. So these are outcomes which will give us true outcome performance measurement at the farm gate. And with that brief introduction, I'm happy to take questions.
So far, Mark, we don't have any questions. I'm hoping we have a few and just open it up to discussion. First, we do have a comment, and thank you, Doug, for noticing that we have the courage to step outside our comfort zones. And it's certainly something that we are encouraging. We thought it was important to put in our values. Questions for Mark?
If there are none, we will be happy to allow people to take the framework away and digest it, and for everybody to get comfortable for Ted's talk. So we'll give people a further minute, and then I'm happy to move forwards. I will at this point recognize everybody's input in terms of the development of this project. We did have over 200 respondents in our initial survey. We met with our full advisory committee for a year to develop this. The board met for a day and a half, and the staff have had extensive input. All of the RDAR staff have had extensive input in developing the framework. So thank you all, particularly Lydia, who did a significant amount of the lifting in terms of the publication work. And I see we actually do have some questions coming in now, and we also have a hand raised from Michael.
Okay, we've got Valerie first. Some of the metrics are developed. Where can you find the metrics that are already developed? The first board of RDAR approved a business plan which had a number of metrics, so they would be available in that business plan. We were tracking well according to those metrics, but to be hard-nosed about some of them, the measures were not outcome directed. They were very subjective and couldn't be measured, which is what drove us hard to saying, okay, what are the real outcome determinants that we can have? You know, some of the outcomes were, for example, in intellectual property,
strategy, and RDAR's intellectual property strategy is the researchers own it, the funders own it. So that was work that was completed. Perhaps some of my senior leadership team can help me with some of the other deliverables. We did look to leveraging funds, which was to be 1 to 1.5. We've exceeded that at 2.3. I don't think we had metrics in terms of percentage of fund vesting. Can the team help me with any of the other existing metrics?
I'll just weigh in as board chair. That's a very good question. This area of metrics and measuring performance and adding value, that when it really gets down to establishing what they are, that's the serious business of management, staff, and board. It's an evolving process. We're new. Of course, we don't want to overpromise, and they have to be meaningful and impactful. So, it's a moving target, and obviously improvement was needed. And so I think that, and also recognizing that it takes a long time for research initiatives in the main, years rather than months to come to fruition. I think it will require a bit of patience, and certainly we would look to anyone for suggestions as to metrics that we could incorporate. I'm not making any excuses. I don't have a definitive answer for you, but that's more context around as we sit and work through this to try and identify what's really meaningful and measurable.
We have a couple of other questions. Ole's asking about our working together to pursue greater federal investment funding. We are pleased to do that with our AFRED dollars. You'll appreciate that CAP funding already comes from the federal government, so it's not really eligible to be stacked, but we are happy to advance other courses. We are working closely, for example, with Genome Alberta, which is part of the Genome Canada initiative. So we are looking to drive home those benefits. And Ole, I know you've worked really closely with our other post-secondary institutes. Ole is the Associate Vice President Research at NATE, with a very willing group of colleges. We now have 9 universities and colleges working together to advance agriculture. So we're really keen to see that initiative move forwards and work with you in terms of bringing further federal dollars into the province. Lauren will be happy to know we're pursuing some discussions with research chairs, which are funding from the Tri-Council. Getting hands into producers in a meaningful way. Yes, that's absolutely front and center in discussions that we had with producers. I heard time again, we know about the research. We've read about the research. We want somebody to show us how to do the research. And so we are looking at ways of putting practices into the hands of producers in such a way supported by, for example, our colleges and our post-secondaries, so that it can be delivered in the right way at the right time. Question about 50% funding for crops and 50% funding for livestock. It's between those two sectors, you remember from the pie chart that the divisions were, those were equal, but they didn't add up to 50%. We are being driven by opportunity. We're being driven by need. And so we have a flexible portfolio. If an opportunity presents in one area, you may see us increasing our investment in that particular area and then look to bring the portfolio back into balance over time.
And based on merit.
Absolutely, based on merit, scientific approach, the producer, partner, private sector partnership to maximize leverage. I'm a very strong supporter of the Rancho Researcher program that I believe Battle River has and Grow. Getting the producer engaged right out of the gate and maintaining that engagement is really key. I've worked with that approach in a number of other sectors in the past. The idea of coming up with a project, throwing it into a researcher's hands, let them go away and tinker with it for 3 years, and you get a camel. We want Percherons here. We want power to drive our industry. And so by having the producers engaged right out of the gate and maintaining that, keeping that dialogue open, that's why you see us really pressing now on communications, those TED type talks where people present ideas and we get to quiz backwards and forwards. Really, engagement is going to be the key to a healthy future.
Okay, as chair, I'm going to, Lydia, forgive me, but it's now we have used the time to 3:30. I am going to take a break for 5 minutes. We will come back. Up next will be our, we'll call it a TED Talk or a fireside chat. I can never measure up to Tom Steve as he did the Prairie Cereals Summit at the Banff Springs in front of a beautiful wood fireplace. I can't match that, but we'll have some fun with Ted, and it will absolutely be an enlightened conversation. So back at 2:35, please. It's my distinct pleasure. I think it's very fitting, as Mark pointed out on the strategic plan, that our purpose is to power the research that transforms agriculture. And when we engaged Ted Billier to participate in this, and on the agenda, you would see the title, The Future of Agriculture. Ted has the ability to discuss things on a global basis. I've known Ted now for, I would say, 10 to 12 years, one of the most impressive individuals that I've had the opportunity to work with. There are many on this call who know Ted and his capabilities, but for those of you who don't, I'll make a brief introduction. Ted resides in Toronto, and don't hold that against him because he's as much a Westerner. He has spent as much time in Alberta. He knows the Alberta landscape. He's traveled this province from stem to stern. He's here often and has been here often. He's been stymied now. This is the third time he was going to come and join us in person. He just told me that normally Ted likes to walk down the street to his local Starbucks, but there's over 2 feet of snow. Is that right, Ted?
Oh yeah, there's more than 2 feet, yeah.
And it'll be wet snow. We can use the moisture out here. But when I said that Ted is the Wayne Gretzky of agriculture, foresight and strategy, he knows where the puck is going to be. And a bit of his background, of course, he has most recently been chair and chief strategy officer for the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. That institute does great work. And one of the board members is Kim McConnell, who I think is on this call as well. Previously, a leading executive with Maple Leaf Foods. He's been an advisor on the ag side to Rabobank. Currently a board member of Patterson Grains or Patterson Global Food. He was a director on the Alberta Livestock and Meat Agency with me for many years. He's an inductee into the Canadian Agricultural Hall of Fame and just has a voracious appetite for looking at data, looking at trends, and determining how to solve problems. So with that, we have had input from many people with many questions, Ted, to start with. We have an hour, perhaps more. I mean, people can drop off when they want to, but this is a great learning opportunity or an opportunity to get your perspective and a perspective that sometimes you think, why didn't I think of that? So let's start with the first question. And we do have media folks on here, Ted, as you know. I hope we can get some good write-ups on some perspectives, or you can get some interviews to advance your ideas. But here's the first question. How do you advance the case for having ruminants, and more specifically, producing beef, when we are faced with the headwinds of the various environmental groups stating that methane production is an existential risk to our world? This may appear to be an extreme statement, but these folks get the media attention and the average citizen buys in. So, what other major misconceptions do you see that need to be addressed for the future of Canada agriculture?
Well, let's start, David, with a bit of what I think, and I could be wrong, but I from what I've been reading, I think is a bit of it good news, and that is that I think the tide is beginning to turn a little bit. I'd be very interested to hear what others think about that. But there's been a number of voices that are beginning to bring the science forward in ways that people can understand better. And this is going to make it much more difficult, I think, for the committed anti livestock people, particularly the ones committed to putting us out of business in terms of cattle, because the science is not supporting them the way it was. There's two or three main threads to that, but the one that I think is that's the most difficult for them is that if you look at the total global cattle numbers over fairly long period of time here now, they haven't changed much. They go up and down a little bit, around essentially around 1 billion. But you would think if they're they're the main cause of the methane being jacked up, that you would see much larger cattle numbers globally. And but give or take 100 million of the billion, I mean, these numbers haven't changed much in a long time. And so that's kind of the science piece. But there's been a number of people coming at this very good stuff. And I think everybody on the call pretty much knows or has read or heard of Frank Mittler's work, at UC Davis. And I really think he's been able to pull the threads together of a number of researchers, particularly in North America, because you're tending to get better stuff out of North America than out of Europe. There's a fundamental issue with the Europeans is that they actually don't understand grassland. They think grassland's a pasture, and so a lot of their work tends to be distorted in a way. But the key for me is that, or the way I would define it is that Frank's been able to show us that it's really, when you look at methane as a system, a cycle like everything else, you have to have cattle numbers change to make a difference. The fact is that what's missing is it's not that there's too many cattle. There's too many cattle perhaps in the wrong place. That's one piece, because we haven't been able to make a proper distinction, or as good a distinction in people's minds, that when you're deforesting parts of the Cerrado and the Amazon, that's a very different calculation than when you're putting cattle on natural grassland, which gives off moisture, which essentially ultimately converts the methane in the air to other chemicals, which are far less harmful. So I think we're getting somewhere with that. What we aren't doing well, I think, is we're beginning to learn how to do it, but we're still a ways away from perfection. Is how do we get in the key influencers involved in this discussion? How do we get that information to them? So the world is really driven by people of influence in the media, and we have some good stuff on our own thing. The Guardians of the Grassland was a really impressive discussion. They'd only got 15. I think I could be wrong in this, but I looked it up on, when I was thinking about some of this stuff about grasslands, and it seems to have about 15,000 views, and on YouTube. But it's a wonderful piece, and the question is, how do you add 2 more zeros to that? You need 1.5 million views to begin to drive things. There's another one that if you haven't seen it, you probably, many of your people I'm sure have, but there's a chap in Saskatchewan which has a nice YouTube handle called Quick Dick McDick. And if you haven't seen his beefing around one, I mean, that takes Mittler's work and puts it in the most humorous way possible that everybody can understand. And he's got 60,000 views on his YouTube thing. And so the question is, how can we get 2 more zeros onto his, and then you'd be really making some progress. So the targets we have to go after, we're seeing some good work coming through the major science journals now. They were entirely different, 2 years ago, but they're beginning to support this. But I think we need to get to, there's 2 media sources that get quoted the most. One is The Guardian in the UK, which runs stories on this all the time, and they tend to have that leaning towards the European view. And the other one is the New York Times, which gets retreaded and requoted, sometimes cursed at. But the reality is, those are the kinds of, that's where we need to make the progress, because I think the science is on our side. That if you have grasslands, you need cattle on them. They're a system, and ultimately, the more work we can do on reducing methane or cattle that aren't on grass, that's the issue. The better. But the cattle on grass, as long as you got enough grassland, you got no problems. Our problem is not cattle, but shrinking grassland. And that's where we should be putting our focus.
And we might get to that later. Additionally, I think I've heard you say we can't allow journalists and others to talk about averages, global averages, because there are regional differences, right? We've got advantage on our feed efficiency and all sorts of things. So I'd like you to comment on that. And the second thing is, the basis of a lot of these things that are referred to is a flawed report out of California some years ago, and also a UN report. I mean, how do we get journalists and others to quit referring to that work, which is no longer credible?
That has been a real problem, ever since the Long Shadow report. The reality is that people aren't doing their homework. That's the reality. And the other side of this coin is, David, as you said, we get hung with the averages. And they're crazy. In no sense should we be allowing that. I'm surprised that people get away with saying that still. But in the other side of this coin, which is probably more important, is that we're going to run out of food long before we fry here. That's the reality. I've been looking specifically for a CAPI purpose at the net food flows. So in other words, people import and export and they produce, but there's 2 groups in the world really. There's the net food exporters. So those people are surplus in a net sense. Canada is one of 7 major countries that are surplus. And that little group of 7 makes up somewhere between about around 45% of all the surplus food traded in the world. And then there's the other group, and there's 5 countries that make up about 50% of all the net deficit food flows in the world. And the reality is, Canada is a very low GHG, highly efficient producer. All this talk tends to take us off the game, which is we should be absolutely focused, and the world should want us absolutely focused on producing enough food to stay in that group, along with other countries you can probably guess. The big boy at the moment is Brazil, but some questions about some of the stuff they're producing: the US, Australia, Argentina, Canada, and tacked on the end, and New Zealand is another one, and tacked on the end of that is India. And the one thing I worry about is India is in transition from those 7 significant surplus food exporters to a deficit net importer. When that happens, there isn't enough food to make it work, particularly with some of the policy issues that are being advanced today, which is going to make sure there isn't enough. I mean, we can get into that maybe later, but it's absolutely clear on one of the big ones, which affects canola and soybeans. I think most people in the audience probably have figured out what that is, but that you can't turn food into fuel when you have essentially a balance in the world where our stock use ratios are actually declining. So there's nobody can make sense out of that one. It leads you to a good place actually for RDAR, a good place for Alberta in the long run, but a really bad place for a lot of the world.
Well, we've got so many questions, and Steve has one there about our federal government and how we're facing headwinds for the advancement of agriculture. We'll get that later. I'm going to ask one more question, and then Lydia has a number of questions that are coming in. I've got some others, but let's go with another one, Ted. Which countries are doing value-added food processing right? And what is the main change you would like to see at the industry level and at the policy level to help Alberta's industry reach a higher global standing in food processing? And of course, I know you know a lot about the Netherlands. You were with Rabobank. Where can or should Alberta lead the way when it comes to investments in ag and ag research? Big question again.
Yeah, big question. So, okay, let's get the common theme out of the way first, because everybody tends to answer that question by pointing at the Netherlands. And I'll just say a couple of things about that, and then I want to focus more on the second part of your question. So the Netherlands has done a lot of things right, for sure. But one of the most important things I think they did was to realize that they don't have a lot of land. And you better make damn good use of it, what you got, because it's not a very big place. And so one of the things they did was they invested very heavily in horticulture. And they were smart enough to figure out that they needed a couple of things. One was as the horticulture in the Netherlands began to become greenhouse, developments, they really became the world's IP center for greenhouse. How do you make horticulture work in greenhouses? So if you're investing in greenhouses in Canada, you're probably using Dutch technology. And then they did another thing. They are also big seed genetics people. So they poured a lot of effort into the genetics side. So they surrounded the industry with smart science. And then finally, they had a banking community that was really favorable to agriculture. And Rabo was one of those. They in fact bank more agriculture in the world than anybody else. And but it came from that mix of IP and fundamentally an identification of what's the real issue. I like to take that that story and twist it a little bit, because really what it's telling you is ultimately your first decision is the most important one. And that is to make sure whatever you're going to develop, whatever you're going to add value to, that you have a fundamental competitive advantage. I see all kinds of people adding value to stuff where I don't understand what the competitive advantage is, then anybody else can do it. So maybe, one of the, a little story close to home for Alberta was the story of how we got involved in the Lethbridge pork plant. And why that.
When you say we, clarify that was.
Sorry, Canada Packers had made an acquisition in Alberta that involved taking over a beef plant in Lethbridge at the time. And Canada Packers those days, or Maple Leaf, was stepping away from the beef business and concentrating on pork and poultry. And they were actually just going to disband this plant, not use it. And but I've been doing a lot of business in Japan, and we've been at those days we were exporting frozen pork to Japan, and but I was very aware of how the Japanese developed chilled pork, because or in those days they called fresh pork in Japan, because I'd visited many of their plants, and and when we were getting rid of this, at the time I was involved deeply in working with. In the US with Hormel. We were exporting Hormel's frozen pork at that time. We had managed to have, by the luck of it, a very, very hot summer in the late 80s. And the Hormel people were doing something very unusual. They were taking a loin and they were chilling it in ice, cutting it in half because they had no cryovac bags that would fit it, and and then sending it on its way. And it was going to New York City. And the reason they were doing that, as it turned out, when I was down there inquiring, why are you destroying these loins? They said, because our claims coming in from New York City because of the hot summer are so bad that we have to do something. We need to add shelf life. They were getting a shelf life around 10 days, but it's a long way from the Midwest to New York City in those days to distribute the pork in 10 days. And they were getting these claims. I said, how much more shelf life are you getting by putting it in ice? And the answer that came back was, we're getting about a week more. Well, it didn't take much arithmetic to figure out if you could get, be up to 21 days on that, you could ship it to Japan. And the only people supplying Japan in those days was Taiwan. So how does this get back to Alberta? Well, we successfully developed the first chilled pork shipments from North America to Japan out of the Hormel plant by putting a team of people in there. And at that point, when all this was occurring, we had a real interest in doing something in Canada at some point. So we were changing this beef plant over to a pork plant, and I said, why don't we build it from the beginning as a Japanese plant, and we'll send chilled Japanese pork. It was extremely difficult to get anybody in Canada Packers to agree to that, because the reality was, I said, frozen works fine. Why do you want to do that? But at the very end of it, there was two things that stood out to me. There was a strong competitive advantage. First off, what's the competitive advantage for North America itself in both in hogs and in cattle? It's really simple. It's a mathematic rule. You cannot move grain and grass to large animals. You have to move the animals to the grass. So fundamentally, we had the competitive advantage. All the world that doesn't believe that produces lots of meat, they do that because of high subsidies and high protectionism. And we didn't need either one. So that was the first point. The second one was that you can see the difference in the meat if you feed them the right feed. And so what that right feed was barley. So if you feed hogs barley, the fat's whiter. And the meat looks, when contrasted to the fat, looks totally different. So we had a built-in competitive advantage on two layers when we started there. And then the third layer of advantage that was, it became a competitive advantage was we decided not to run the slaughter end of the plant the way we do in Canada, but run it like we do in Japan. And the key to that was, there's two issues there. One was that you wind up being able to chill that pork very rapidly, because essentially you take the skin off just like you do cattle, and without that big overcoat on, the meat chills down much quicker, and far less energy required to chill it, and you get a higher quality meat out of that. So that became it was a clear competitive advantage, and everything we did to differentiate on top of that was additional work. So that has worked, David, very well. That plant is still, I believe, the single most profitable per unit pork plant in North America, it tells you that the core to this thing is to differentiate, but to understand fundamentally what your competitive advantages are. And I think, and you can expand that to any of those, businesses as you add value.
Okay, yeah, competitive advantage. You did mention yesterday when we were talking that people forget that one of Holland's competitive advantages is they can import raw product, process it, and send it out, and they've got, 300 million consumers within the EU.
500.
500. We've got the US, but that's a difference too.
They have a very protected market relative to what we have with the US. It's very difficult, as we've found, to get access even when we have a trade agreement with the EU. It's very difficult to actually ship the product there, and that's another story for another day. We know why that's the case, but. So they have that protected market, but they also had one of the largest and most efficient ports in Europe, and they had the limited agricultural mass of their own, except what they were adding high value to. So they realized their point of difference there. What they could add value to was they could add value to anything in the world that would come into them cheaply through a beautiful port, and then run it into Europe where it's well protected. So they became excellent at they do pork, they do poultry, they do particularly well with vegetable oils and adding value, and dairy, and you can name it. All those things that they bring in and then they add value to.
Good. Lydia, I'll defer to you. Have you picked a great question for Ted, please?
Absolutely. And I thank you to those who are asking questions and commenting on it. So I've got two questions here, and they're a little related. So I'm going to combine them. And fundamentally, they're about food security, food affordability, and inflation, and around the cost of production. At the same time, we're looking at, there's increasing climate change, climate disasters. We're looking into researching increased efficiency that can only go so far when we're talking about our supply chain and different factors playing in. So the question is really around your thoughts around all of these complicating issues around food security, affordability, cost of production, and so on.
Well, let's try to unpack it a little bit. The food security issue is for real. And I would also say it's an issue that, and I'm going to start by talking at the global level first, then I'll come down to the Canadian level of it. But at the global level, there's no doubt in my mind that unless we have a major technology change in how we produce food, where we don't need land, then we are going to have, in the not too distant future, a significant food security problem. It's beginning to unfold in front of our eyes, and it will continue, I think, to be pretty difficult, regardless of whether we have good crops in North America next year or not. We'll need two bumper years to make any difference at all, and we'll need a great crop out of South America too. So there is a global food security issue for sure. As I mentioned, some countries are becoming extremely dependent. I wish I had charts to go through this with you because it would be much easier. But one of the things that has caught my attention over the time is how much of the world's food is now supplied by trade as opposed to being grown locally. 20 years ago, it was a fairly small number. It was something around about 12%. It's a big number now. It's getting closer to 20, up in that high teens. That's supplied globally, and that's very fragile. And anything can go wrong in that. And as I said, there are very few net exporters that are supplying most of it. So we have a big concentration issue. But if you take it down a notch to food security in Canada, that's a very different kettle of fish. We did a CAPI study on this a while back, and I remember when we were writing it, we said, why don't we just call it the 3 A's? There's 3 A's here. There's availability, accessibility, and affordability. Now, which of those apply? Well, it's pretty hard to argue that there's some availability problem in Canada. When we look at the at what we're doing today, 70% of what we consume in Canada in terms of food is produced in Canada, and yet we still export 50% of what we produce. So we are wildly surplus, in the things. Now, if from a preference basis, maybe you wouldn't be able to get everything you need, or you not, I shouldn't say need, want, or you might have to pay through the nose to get it, but you're not going to starve to death if we can convert that in food. The only availability issue that we have in Canada, you can really put your finger on, is that we tend to, if you believe your food security is about processed foods, then we do have an issue, because we are by far the largest processed food importer in percentage. We're the US's massive customer for processed foods. The stuff that we send down there raw and bring back here, we're massive, and that we're bigger than in the high value added consumer foods than Japan, Korea, China, and Hong Kong put together for the US, just to give you a little idea of how important that is to them. So we do have that issue. But that's pretty fertile ground, because it allows, that means that, when we finally figure out what our competitive advantages are, we could build on that a little bit to do import replacement. But we don't have to worry too much about that, because there's plenty of the rest of the world that we can ship to, and we're already consuming a fair bit of our own. But when you get to the second piece of that, the accessibility issue, we do have a problem in Canada. There are parts of Canada that have accessibility problems. Certainly our native communities in the north have a big accessibility problem, and we need to help them solve that problem. And those are going to be technology solutions. And David, they're probably going to involve better energy solutions for them than they have today, so they can grow some of the stuff themselves in the north. So accessibility is an issue, but it's an even bigger issue for a lot of the world. And COVID is putting it on the map for sure, with the issues that we were running into with the logistics, as you and I were chatting about at the beginning of this, is that the logistics issue is going to make accessibility incredibly more difficult, and we're not done with it yet. That's for sure. We're not, as we go through this. We may have another round of logistic nightmares coming as China begins to lock down, when they're trying to deal with the Omicron. In terms of affordability, we do have a problem. Affordability in Canada, but that is not, the key thing is that shouldn't be on the ag agenda. That belongs over on the social agenda, because that's about income. We can't solve affordability by essentially asking ag to solve that problem. And that's a problem that we need to push back hard on, because that's going to get us nowhere. So I think if you unpack that issue, it's a little easier, but I can't remember what the rest of the question was.
I think that covers all of it. Although I have a question that's going to ask you to put on your Wayne Gretzky crystal ball hat. Will trade and investment with China resume 3 years ago, or is that forever damaged?
Well, it's funny you say that. I have no concern about that's less of our problem and a hell of a lot more of China's problem, because
just before you carry on, Ted, tell the folks how involved you are in China and how often you go there, and you actually speak one of the dialects, so that's what Ted also brings to this. And I think you represent a company in Toronto. I'm not giving all your, you make so much money. I just have to ask you how many yachts you now have to water ski.
My yacht, as you know, my yacht's a canoe. So
up at the lake, Anyway, tell them a bit about your involvement in China and how China is one area, and Japan that Ted is an expert.
Well, I guess I've been involved in those two markets for most of my working life. And my first visits to Asia, when it was so long ago that it still looked like Asia, before you had any high rises. You had one high rise building in Hong Kong the first time I went there. And when I went to China the first time, it was probably 1972, and I was sent over there to buy peanuts for Canada Packers to make peanut butter. And I had to go to the Canton Fair because you weren't allowed to go into mainland China. And at that point, they had the fair in Hong Kong, and that's where the Guailos, the people that were from foreigners, went to buy things. And so I've been at it since then, and I've had a long history of it with Maple Leaf Foods. But the thing I think is pretty clear, David, is that China is coming to the conclusion. Certainly, most of the well-educated leaders in China are knowledgeable about the fact that they cannot feed themselves. I think I think that's the one thing that probably we aren't fully aware of or understand, but they're getting the picture pretty clearly, and they know that their own projections are very aggressive and probably unlikely to be met, even unless everything went perfect, and things aren't going perfect. So I think that we'll find there's more opportunity to work with China in the future if we can get through this nasty period that we're in now, where geopolitical strategies are beginning to push aside some things that are absolutely necessary. One of those things is you have to be able to eat, and so I think we will see saner heads prevail eventually here on this. But in the meantime, I mean, we're not lacking in places to go with our product. As I said, you don't see any, we see lower stocks in Canada and lower stock use ratios globally than we've seen in what, since 2000, and I don't know, probably the early 2000s, when we had the Great Grain Robbery. Sorry, the 1970s, not 2000. My brain's gone. 1973, since we had the Great Grain Robbery, and so we got a lot of digging out to do. So I think the ball's in China's court a bit, because we're not lacking in places to go with the product. Sure, we'd like to supply China because they can pay more for it than others can, and we've got no reason not to. But it's kind of their choice. They're going to have to figure out how they're going to feed themselves.
Lydia, I'll just jump in with a question here. So all investors in innovation face the challenge of balancing funding of current sector research with new areas and opportunities. And this afternoon, we saw in RDAR's strategic framework an emphasis on balancing a portfolio of research projects. What advice would you give RDAR and its members and the group that are involved here to balance the portfolio between current industry innovation and the new sectors, technologies, and products?
Well, when I'm looking at the presentation there that we had, that Mark gave us, one thing that was going through my mind was that RDAR is doing some fabulous work, very, very targeted at what I think is very important, which is productivity. So 3 of those 4 pieces of his chart really nailed productivity in different ways. So that you were doing all kinds of good things to, for yields, for health of animals, for crop health, for soil health, sustainability. Those are wonderful things because they're boosting productivity. And God knows we need productivity boost because we are in a multi-year slide in terms of global agricultural productivity decline. The productivity has got to increase about 1.8% to 2% a year in order to keep feeding everybody, particularly if incomes rise and people decide to up their interest in protein. Then that has to carry on. We are not getting that out of productivity increases anymore, despite wonderful things happening on the genetics front. We're not getting it. And why aren't we getting it? Primarily because of climate change. Primarily because Mother Nature's not giving us the same respect that she used to. And at the same time as that is overall agricultural funding has been falling in the developed world. So we have a productivity problem, and I do see RDAR as doing the right thing in pushing that forward. However, having said that, that's only half of business, right? Business is made up of two things: revenue and cost. And the productivity gains are all driven primarily at not keeping your costs under control, for the amount of output you have. That's not bringing you new innovation in the sense of new product. And so what I'm a little bit concerned about is I don't see a lot of that happening anywhere. It's not an RDAR thing, but it's that, when you think about that, and given the fact that you are you're an agricultural organization that is trying to bring productivity back to the farm level, it's unlikely that ideas that are going to be disruptive and certainly new business ideas tend to be quite disruptive to whatever is in place already, particularly if you're in a business as all agriculture is, where your fixed asset is so high relative to your other assets. Most businesses, the fixed capital is small, is not as large as the rest of your capital budget. Agriculture it is, so you're going to be far more cautious about wanting to disrupt that. And what I think would be useful at some point is to have a piece of the portfolio, and I really like the idea that RDAR has a portfolio management strategy. And don't get me wrong, if you didn't do this, it wouldn't hurt RDAR or wouldn't hurt Alberta. But I think you could do a little more by figuring out, okay, so what is that new driver? What's going to happen? Where's the next thing like chilled pork going to come from? Chilled pork would never have arisen under those circumstances. In fact, you would have had all the problems that I had trying to convince the old management of Canada Packers to even invest in the thing in their first plant, because they had a plant in Toronto and they refused to turn it over because they said no, that's going to screw up our business. We're in the frozen pork business, and the only reason we got away, the only reason anything happened was we had a new owner shortly after when I was doing the Hormel business. Otherwise, no chilled pork, and that chilled pork is what has driven the pork business in Canada for the last 30 years. And it was only the fact that the old management left, and when Wallace McCain came in, he the first thing he said to me, well, he yelled at me. He said, "Why are you doing so much business with our competitors?" Because in those days, the first business I was doing in Canada actually was with the Gainers plant in Edmonton, and the only reason Gainers accepted it was Barry Mayer. He had a big problem on his hands. Gainers had gone broke. The government owned the plant. The plant was going to have to be shut down. And one day he said to me, when we were having a cup of coffee down at our French fry plant, he said to me, I got this big problem. And I said, how would you like some new business for it? And all you have to do is invest in it. You have to invest in machinery, which nobody else has. And you got to take a leap of faith. And lo and behold, he took the leap of faith, and we had a run rate of about $23 million of a profit within 6 months of deciding to do that. Plant eventually got shut down totally, but it brought chilled pork to the country, because Maple Leaf decided that they were making a lot of money in that plant. It was just the oldest plant in Canada at the time, pretty well, and you're going to go build a new one. So they went and built brand new.
Ted, I think I hear you say maybe take some more risks, go for a home run on something that's not proven. So we'll take that. a couple of our participants here, Graham Finn and Nicole Neubauer, are talking about food waste. And you said that, 1 to 2% gain in food production is necessary. What's your view of how much food is wasted in the world, especially in developed countries, and how we might approach that in terms of that's consumers being lazy, I suspect, or consumers having too much money, or I'm not sure what it is. Just give us your comments on food waste for these two keeners that are writing in the chat box here.
Food waste reminds me very much of the other problem we just discussed when we talked about essentially food security. You've got to break that problem down to understand it. And so in your developed world, boy, there's a lot of food waste, and that food never gets to the marketplace to get wasted in the first place. It's a small percentage of the food actually makes it to the market. So much of it is rotting in the fields and the transport, and it's of no value when it gets to somewhere. It's diseased, etc. So they have a huge food waste problem that is killing them. And those are things that could all be dealt with essentially by with capital investment, with the investment in infrastructure and plants, and that is beginning to happen. But that's the biggest piece of it. The second biggest, as you're referring to, is in the developed world, particularly in North America. And that's the waste that occurs from essentially supermarket through consumer. In some cases, actually, to some degree, it can occur in the distribution system itself. But the big piece is, in the consumer side. And I think, besides, it's kind of shaking our finger at consumers and things like that, I think the big thing to do is to ask ourselves, so let's assume we aren't able to train everybody to be better cooks and make sure they clean out their fridge regularly. I think that's kind of barking up the wrong tree, frankly. I think the big issue is we should never think of anything that's going in the green box as food waste. That's somebody's input to other types of business. And you've got, I'm sure, people on the call that could tell you all kinds of things you could do with that. But that's input to somebody else's business in terms of upcycling it. And particularly, God help you if you're worried about meat being wasted like that, because right now, a friend of mine in the meat business that makes the oils out of it, his biggest problem is competing with the people that want the stuff for biodiesel, and he can't get enough. He runs a food. He runs a food business out of the good cuts that come out of a plant when they have fat left over and stuff like that. He can't get enough of it anymore because he can't pay as much for the food use for the lard and the tallow as the biodiesel people can for burning it. So be careful what you define as waste, and because that's somebody's input you're talking about that needs that. It's all types of fats and calories that are energy in some other form.
Okay, Lydia, next to you for a question, and we're going to try and shut this down at about the hour mark, or 3:35, 3:40. So we've got a bit of time. Lydia? Certainly.
So one of the questions that we've got coming in, that we're talking about, the CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs is a demographer about declining global population because of birth rates are below replacement. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, I've looked at 3 different analyses of that lately for a different purpose. And if you're looking out towards the end of the century, maybe then that becomes an issue. If you're looking at specific countries, there's clearly no growth in the developed world, but it's not rapidly declining as people think, other than Japan and maybe some parts of Eastern Europe. The big decline is in China. and that is a slowing. We're not quite at the completely at the worst part of the curve yet, but we can say for this year, certainly the labor force for the first time in China is shrinking. And so they're right on that part of it. On the other part, looking at Africa and the Middle East, there isn't any decline that's visible on any of the charts that I've seen so far, other than what is very, very recent that we've seen is maybe COVID has had an impact. We'll know that in a couple of years. But, so you're still going to get growth. It's just not going to be the kind of growth that we've seen historically. And yes, you will get decline, but I mean, are you going to plan your business around a decline that we're going to get, 20 years hence, or are you going to plan your business around the fact that we're flattening out, but having lots of growth still in Africa? Every chart I've looked at says the minimum we're going to add in Africa and the Middle East is about 2 billion people. You'll lose some of that in the rest of the world for sure, but this still means growth. It doesn't mean decline in the next 20 years. Beyond that, anybody's game. So I would be careful about being cavalier with the numbers, because unless you've got better reports than what the UN just released, they're pushing that decline out. And yes, it's decline, but they're pushing it out some years. So I would tend to be looking at how do you work with the population numbers more or less that we have today. But one factor, the most important factor, is not the population number for what we produce in Alberta, or shouldn't be. If it is, then we're in real trouble. But if it shouldn't be. It should be what's the income level? Because income is what drives the stuff we want to sell, not population. We're not massive sellers of stuff to Africa. We're looking to sell our stuff, hopefully to the part of the world that can afford to buy quality. So we need to keep. I think we've got to be careful about how we use those ideas, because they can lead you off into a very different world. I think I'd be focused on: are we still looking at income growth? If we are looking at income growth, it means protein growth fundamentally, and vegetable oil growth fundamentally. Yes, it will mean some high quality grain growth as well. So fruit and veg growth. I mean, you're going to get growth in the things that create a lot of income, and things that don't create a lot of income, maybe not. So I'd focus on income, not on the number of people.
Okay. This may be the last question, Ted, and we really thank you for being available, and we'll have more of these. Here's a question for you. A number of recent events, and we've touched on this briefly, but there's an addition to this. A number of recent events have highlighted the weaknesses in our food and commodity supply chains, affecting both producers and consumers. What can be done to mitigate supply chain risk in Alberta and Canada? And one proposed solution to supply chain disruption is small local packing and processing facilities. Economies of scale has not supported the feasibility of local meat processing in the past. Will the potential of another pandemic or other global disruption event be enough for consumers to support them? So that's a little bit on the smaller scale production. And then I'll put a tag on, which is big. I'd like you to comment on the importance of labor, or shortages of labor in our sector. And then that may be the end. You can go have a Starbucks.
Yeah, I'll need one. You may have to repeat the question as we go through it a bit, because there's a lot to that. Again, these are things that are terribly difficult to unpack. But
I'll put it simply. Producing food closer to local populations, and the fact that you don't have to go across borders or across countries to distribute it, thereby probably smaller processing, local packing or processing facilities. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
What's the feasibility of that, or is scale everything? And then the second piece is just comment a bit about labor.
Okay, I'll just, as I start that, I want to remind you again that 70% of what we consume in the way of food in Canada, we produce here. So it's not like we're not doing that. You know, to some, the question is, can we do more of it? And the answer is yes, perhaps. But remember that 50% of what we produce, we export. So unless you're going to bring more land into production, you know, you have to have some trade-off somewhere in that package. CAPI produced a paper on it, so did there's been several papers produced on the issue of small plants, and do we need more of them? And the answer would we could always use more plants, providing you have more raw material for that. So in the Alberta case, I assume the people that want more plants are either intending for one of the big plants to leave, or they're intending for to simply come up with more land, because you know at the end of the day you have to have animals to go through the plants, and so you've got to think about, do I have enough animals? Well, already we're starting to see, you know, significant numbers of cattle now coming into Alberta to get processed. That's not because there's a lack of. It's not. I mean, that one would think anyway. I'm sure some of the people on the line could explain this better. But when you've got cattle coming into Alberta to be processed, it suggests that you need more cattle in Alberta, and you're exporting cattle too, of course, at the same time. But that let's not think simply in terms of the plants. The second piece of that puzzle is that all those studies show that, of course, what we already know is that those smaller plants tend to be more costly in terms of unit cost to run. So the way small plants can work in that scenario is if they're highly differentiated. So the really, really small plants are fine because they can be local food industries. People can come up, drive up to the farm, and you've got a country slaughter on the farm. Medium-sized plants can work very well, and you've got a good one. I heard you had one of the prices on the call. They run a great shop. Centerra is in that medium-sized category, and I take my hats off to them all the time because they have figured out that chain. You know how to link their slaughter through to the retail, and in Japan, Ray was pretty smart. He lined it up with a customer that was the right size, that wanted his product at the right time. I don't know if they're still doing that, but it was a good move. So you can do a medium-sized plant, which is usually the toughest place to be. Really small is always okay because you're so differentiated locally. Really big works because your costs are much lower. The middle ground is harder unless you differentiate. And so he figured it out. One of the best stories I've ever seen, and I wish if anybody from Alberta visits Toronto and they want a tour, give me a call. I'll take them to what is easily the best butcher shops in Canada. At least they make the most money, and it's Cumbry. And you can go on the website and look up Cumbry Meats, and you'll see they have worked something out where they're an alliance between farmers who produce either chickens or pork or beef, and they produce it as part of that consortium for Cumbry. Cumbry runs these really fancy butcher shops, and the one thing that they have no interest in is competing on price. They couldn't care less. Their idea is whatever Loblaws is selling for, we'll make it way more expensive. And guess what? They get lineups at the door. And essentially then they subcontract out the slaughter, but they cut the stuff up in the store and in a very large stores, and they display the beef carcasses in the windows, which it really annoys the anti-beef movement. When you walk down Bayview Avenue, you can see in a beautiful glass window the carcasses hanging, and you can see the numbers on the establishment number, and you can go in and ask them, and they have a fair bit of traceability running. So they may not tell you which farm it came from, but they'll tell you which one of 3 or 4. So being able to differentiate at that level is the salvation for small operations, because they use provincially as well as I think they do have contracts with one of the federal ones as well, federal suppliers, but for slaughter. So that's one way of going about it. But the key to that is the differentiation.
Okay. Well, we'll get into labor another time. I see there's a number of questions, and Lydia, you'll collated them. We'll keep all the questions and keep them for another time. I think we're at 3:35. Ted, you've been very generous with your time and your thoughts. On behalf of everyone at RDAR and certainly the 150 people that were online, and we're now down to about 115. I really want to express my gratitude for your willingness to contribute. I know you're in our corner. I know that you're fighting for us, given the carbon taxes and the increased costs. You're in Ottawa often. You're close to the seat of power. We need to have influence on policy and sensible policy. So keep up the good work with Cappy. And thank you for your time. Do you have any parting comments for the producers of Alberta?
No, I think that it's a good place to be right now. And I would just say that, have the courage to keep investing in what you're doing. And I think RDAR it could be a phenomenal resource to do that. It's just, let's focus very much on doing something that's a lot harder for other people to copy. And if you can do something that starts on the farm where most of the hard to copy stuff goes, and you find a willing processor that's going to carry that through, that becomes really difficult for a big organization to come along and copy, because they've got to copy both what's processing, and they can do that, but then they have to copy the farm model, and they won't want to do that. So that that's when things get really good.
Good. Well, great advice. Thank you very much. Stay warm.
Thank you. I got to go dig out my driveway.
Good. And anybody that wants to communicate to us, here's our contact information. The RDAR website, of course, and that's still undergoing improvements and change. And we've got the email. So thank you very much for joining us. Bye for now.